I've been last year was a chance really how my whole show started was I brought business owners and entrepreneurs on to originally the idea was to like discuss the blueprint, like how it is that they started, how they made the decision to take a path that was, less traveled. We have
Right.
more employees than we have business owners, right?
Sure.
So, but if someone's inspired or has ever considered owning their own restaurant or whatever the case may be, I wanted to be able to talk to people that had done these type of things um, with a modicum of success, so
Sure.
that way they could inspire other people. And then it branched out to people like movers and shakers kind of in their industry,
Yeah.
and then just people making an impact. And so I was so happy that, like, it's so crazy the circumstances that led up to our meeting. So
Yeah.
when I met Adam Messer through a guy that I work with, Corey Brooks, who's a photographer.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, he's like, hey, let me link you up with this guy. And then I did. And then his and we've had this amazing connection from day one,
Nice.
where we've been interlinked. And then he wanted to start the Savannah Podcast Association.
Right.
And that was really, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like he operates on a different level, and so do
Sure.
you than me, because I'm still active duty Army, and so I'm
Yeah.
still like trying to break loose of the cage that kind of surrounds me of
Sure.
a
Yeah.
little bit more structure. So we had our first in-person meetup through the Savannah Podcast Association, and that's where I got to meet Jason. And so I was going through, I literally like Googled your name. I was like, I want to encapsulate all that is Jason, but instead of me fumbling around trying to do it, just if you want to give like how do you categorize yourself, I guess?
Well, I would call myself a creative professional and a storyteller. I've worked in television for the last 17 years or so. The only outside when I graduated college, it's the first career path I went down. And but I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17 years old, and I've written somewhere on the order of 25 or 30 now.
That's incredible.
And yeah, it's something. There are a lot of bad ones in there.
Oh no, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's something that I definitely want to dive into. But like
Sure.
So for me, I am so not in the loop with this kind of stuff with this area. Like, I'm
Yeah.
aware, I'll see like the credits rolling and it's like screenwriter, this, director, this. So what does it mean to be the screenwriter for a movie?
Well, you can break it out in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But at the most base level, it is the writer of the actual film. A screenplay is a blueprint for the actual movie.
Mm-hmm.
I've written a lot of original screenplays, which are, from nothing. I did the whole thing. More recently, I've done a lot of things for producers, so they have an idea or a story or an outline, and then I interpret that through, there might be 2 pages of what they give me, and then I expand it into, as much as I can, a world, and it might be 90 to 110 pages by the time I'm done with it.
Sure.
So that entails developing the characters, the story, the plot, the structure, tone, theme, all of those things. And so that's kind of the easiest way to say, like, the screenwriter is the first voice
Mm-hmm.
that comes on a film, by and large, the first voice that interprets the movie, and then that's of course followed by a director, an editor,
Sure.
et cetera. So
have you done any any writing, any like authorship, or have you like written any part of a book or assisted in writing any types of books or anything?
So I have attempted and slash am still attempting to write a
Yeah,
novel.
gotcha. Yeah,
I've got more than 300 pages into to a kind of a sci-fi futuristic, thing.
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's a different discipline than screenwriting.
And that's exactly what I was curious about. I'm like, how does because if a movie can be encapsulated in 90 to 100 pages of a screenwrite, I mean, a typical short book is going to be like 200, 300 pages,
Right.
Up to 17, 2000 pages.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
in the
that's
process, how do you approach that? Like, what's the difference in the approach, I guess?
so with a screenplay, you are writing a visual. You don't write what a character thinks. You're writing a very explicit story versus an implicit story. So
Okay.
you're not telling your audience what is going on inside. You
Oh,
are
okay.
you are allowing the action and your story to inform the audience, and hopefully an actor is receiving that information and then performing so that it's you know cohesive throughout the story. It is very different. I mean, screenwriting is a very economical type of writing. There's a lot of white space on a screenplay,
Mhm.
and there are some screenwriters, uh, Aaron Sorkin or Tarantino, who have are very dialogue heavy.
Yeah.
So their scripts tend to run long because they're not
Just,
relying as much on
right,
action.
of course. And so,
Um,
yeah, and that was the next thing that I thought of was like, how are you writing out like the full script, like when it comes to like the actual conversations that are taking place, like all of that happens in the screenwriting?
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So what I do is I write, in terms of action and kind of choreographing action. I try to make sure that it is very intrinsic to the story,
Hmm.
but because the thing to realize as a screenwriter, and you know, you have to have a next to zero ego, because this is going to be filtered through so many other artists, on before it gets to any sort of finished place. Certainly a producer is going to have certain budgetary or logistical constraints they're going to place on you.
Absolutely.
The director is going to have their own interpretation. The actors will have their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And then, when all of the cinematographer is going to have an interpretation of the way it's shot, and then an editor is going to go through and cut it. So you're writing something. What I think what you're really hoping to do is to make sure that the heart of what you're writing is strong enough to carry through all these filters
Right.
and still resonate in the way that you're intending it to.
Yeah, the core, the
Um,
spirit of it continues to stick around even as they mess around with kind of the external layers, like the
Absolutely.
heart and soul. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with the director? Like, do you have input with them while the movie is being shot, or does that happen all on the front end?
Well, it's actually funny. So I've had two films that have been produced thus far. One, uh, at least one, is slated or scheduled for this year. So with the first script, I was brought in to rewrite the project. It was a producer that I knew, and they wanted some reinterpretation of the text that was there, which I did. So I delivered a draft, and then
Mhm.
I washed my hands of it, and they went away and they shot it, and then I didn't see it until it was done.
Oh,
Essentially, I
wow.
did I did have to write a couple of little pickups here and there, but
Hmm.
by and large, once I delivered that draft, I was kind of hands off. I got feedback from
Hmm.
from the set because I knew one of the producers very well. But in terms of real input, during that process, I didn't have any.
Gotcha.
Um, Now the second project is an interesting one, which is Deadwater, which I know you have a copy of.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, that was an awesome thing. Jason showed up with some copies. There's some signed copies. I cannot believe the world that I live in, where I walked away with a signed, like, screenwriter's signed copy of a movie that he produced. And it's not even it's that is epic in and of itself. Like, I continuously find myself in positions I'm like, I have no business being in this place where I'm at right now. So that was cool. And the novelty of it was insane alone. But then you look at the people who were actually in the movie,
Yeah,
and you're like, holy crap.
Right.
Like,
it's very cool, man. Yeah, so that project is interesting because the same producer that brought me onto that previous project, which is a movie called Running for My Roots, it's a family country music film, brought me on to, he and I had worked on a couple of other projects. I'd adapted a book for the screen for him, which we couldn't get the financing for, which is the story with a lot of these projects. It's always about trying to find the financing, right?
Yeah.
And you just don't stop until you find it. So with Deadwater, he was approached by an investor who had money to that he wanted to invest in film, and he had a certain amount of money, and Chris, who was the producer on Running for My Roots, and one of the producers, and then the producer and director and eventually the director of Deadwater, came to me and said, "Hey, do you have anything for this budget line?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, can you write something?" And I said, "Of course." And so we went away to Starbucks in Savannah and sat down with a sheet of paper, and I said, "Well, we've got limited cast, limited locations on this budget." It wasn't a massive budget. And he's like, "Okay, why don't we put them on a boat?" And I was like, "We will put them on a boat," which is the worst idea of all time, by the way. Any screenwriters or filmmakers, they're like, "We're going to put them on a..." Don't
put them on a boat.
Put them on an island. Don't put them on a boat. The boat should be in the ocean somewhere. But anyhow, so we put them on a boat. I went away and I wrote a 7-page treatment, which is just basically the story, so for a shorthand of the story. And I sent it to him, and he argued with me about it for 2 weeks, and we came to, and he's one of my best friends in the world. It's like a brother to me. So, we can have honest conversations about things that we disagree about. And eventually we came to some compromises, which I think worked better for the film, which is always good when the compromises actually seem to work better.
Right.
And then I went away and I wrote the screenplay in about 3 or 4 weeks, and I brought a draft back to him, and he read it, he liked it, and he went to the investor, and the investor said, "Yeah, I don't really want to invest in movies anymore." And so we were like, so the project sat on the shelf for a year.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, and then he found someone who was looking for an investment opportunity and presented it to him, and he was on board with it. And then from that point, it was a very kind of quick succession of things, because I think we got the okay that we were going to be funded like in April or May, and then they were shooting at the end of July, early August of that year.
Mm-hmm.
So within 6-8 weeks, it was, the money's going to come through. Now you got to prep the project, you got to cast it, you got to find locations and boats. In our case, we had to find boats. And what was funny was, he had done some of the due diligence early on when the first investor was involved, and told me the boat that we would rent for the movie in that case. And so I had gone online and downloaded the blueprint of the boat, the floor plan and everything. And I wrote a lot of my scene work and my action around that physical, like what I could see, that physical space.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he got down there, he had an opportunity to get a much, much, much better boat as our hero boat. And then so to go back to your original point, I know this is a long way to get around to it about whether you're involved or not.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big reasons that I got a chance to be involved with writing as much as I was during the production of that was because our physical space was different. So I had to rewrite choreography and
Gotcha.
scenes and the way they were set up. The joke on Deadwater was that when we wrapped the movie, the script would finally be locked. And so it was quite an adventure. And you know, I was really fortunate that that Chris produced and directed that, because he let me be a lot more involved,
Sure.
you know, in that part of it than I think a writer typically is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I saw dailies, you know, scenes from the day they shot them. I saw, you know, stills. I heard some of the stories from what was going on, some of the challenges, some of the things, and all things that, you know, I will, you know, take forward, you know, hopefully when I direct my own project,
Yeah.
which I hope is coming up soon as well. So, so yeah, it was, it varies, you know, based on your relationship with the kind of the key management of the picture.
Sure. And so is that something that you wanted? Like, do you like being involved to that level, or would you rather like write, cut it, and step away?
Yeah, I think it depends. You know, with as I mentioned earlier, I've written uh, a lot of projects recently that I've kind of I'm hired gun on, and so obviously when the project, you know, the idea and everything originates outside of you, I think, you know, there's less of a, you know, personal attachment to it. So in those cases, I would typically rather write them and get them to a point that everybody's happy with them, and
Mm-hmm.
then they can go on and do it, and then I can kind of go and work on my passion projects.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
with
That's
Deadwater,
not your baby. You know, you're like, okay,
exactly,
yeah, I get it.
exactly. Deadwater was, you know, a lot of it was originated originally by me. You know, so there were certain things that changed on set and whatever,
Yeah.
but a lot of it was, you know, started here,
Mm-hmm.
and so, you know, I was a lot more engaged in, like, you know, and even to the point where when we had rough cuts and things, Chris came. I remember Chris came down here a couple times. He's based out of Atlanta, but he came down to Savannah to visit and, you know, stay here with me, and you know, we went through the film and we made edit notes and things like that, which was really great for me because
Mm-hmm.
my, you know, most of my career is in, you know, kind of more post-production writing, but then also post-production and that sort of things, and so it was really a very good opportunity to feel the whole process.
Yeah. And yeah, and especially if you, because you said that you're looking to step and you're going to direct something this year.
Hoping to.
Hoping. Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah, I have a movie that I wrote a couple of years ago, well, a few years ago now. Gosh, it's probably been 6 years that I wrote the first draft of it.
It's
Called
crazy how
Monkey.
time goes by.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. It's called Monkey Island, and it's based on a real place off the Georgia coast where there was a primate research facility starting in the 70s. I think this might have been the 60s. It's been so long since I researched it.
It's a great time for research.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Before a lot of the regulations were in place.
Let's just throw some LSD, or LSD, the monkeys, or some PCP at them. Let's see what happens, right? But yeah, so it's a real place, and I had uh, I had learned about it because I'd done I work in television promotion, and so I'd pitched a story. Uh, there's this thing called the Tybee bomb, where there was an air accident in the 50s, I think it was, where a nuclear bomb had to be jettisoned off of an aircraft off the coast of Tybee Island, Georgia, and it's never been found. And so
Oh, jeez Louise.
that's a compelling story, right?
It is compelling.
Yeah.
I'm already in. I'm sold. Where are we going?
Right. And so I pitched the idea for the story for our news station, our news team to do. And then I was nominated for a regional Emmy for the promotion I put together for it. And one of the guys I worked with, I was at an event, and he was like, "Hey, man, I really like that Tybee Bomb promo you did. It's really cool." I was like, "Oh, yeah, thanks. It turned out great." He said, "You know the story I want to hear told?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "Monkey Island." I was like, "Whoa, what's Monkey Island?" And he told me about this. And so I went back and I pitched it to our news team again, to our news director at the time. And she was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And she ran it by our general manager at the time. And he's like, "Yeah, I like that." And when the news anchor came by, because he knew it was the story that I pitched, he came by and said, "Hey, man, we're about to head out to get on the boat and go out to like kind of survey the island. It's not they couldn't go on the island, but they could survey it." He's like, and we've got an interview with the guy that was involved with the program, early on. Is there anything you want me to ask him? And I said, I only care about you asking him one question. And he said, "What is it?" I said, "Can they swim?" And he goes, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that." I'm like, "Yeah." And so he went away, did the story, came back. I found him later that day. He was editing the story. And I said, "Well, what did he say?" Thinking like, it's like, oh, it's way too far off the mainland for them to get. He turned around to me, he said, "Yeah, they get to the mainland all the time." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Okay, man, this is legit. I'm writing this movie." So I wrote this I wrote it geared to be like a $25,000 movie that I could just take my own personal gear, go out with some buddies and shoot this kind of fake documentary style thing. And then I got held up a couple times with a couple of producers that were interested in the idea. And it's kind of been in limbo. I've been busy with other things, and no one, it's kind of become unencumbered at this point. And so now I really, really want to make that movie now.
Yeah.
So if I can make it, I know exactly how it's supposed to look. I would really like to do that one. And then I've got another one that I'd be super jazzed to direct, which is kind of more in the vein of like the Blumhouse, like kind of the Get Outs and
gotcha.
that kind of genre. I've got one that I've written that I think would be perfect for that I want to direct as well in 3 or 4 years. But yeah, man, like it's it's always a progress, as you well know, is pushing forward and being resilient and trying to achieve the next objective, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's definitely an importance, and I'm really diving into a lot of research about AIM and like the targeting aspect of your life, and from the baseline of like when you wake up, like the reason that we're able to operate in the world that we in how we do so today is because we target everything. There's a pinpoint target for from when I wake up, I see my phone, that's my target, to that level of minutia, to that 5-year goal, to that to your legacy goal, and so how do I assign the correct, or how do I select the correct target,
right.
and it's, so I'm actually working through like a training program right now to try to help people get to that point, because I've done it,
That's awesome, man.
And so it's fun, it's exciting, but the one thing that just kept piquing my interest as you're like telling your parts of these stories is that you have all these different skill sets that you didn't just pick up all at once. Like your ability to turn around now and to essentially produce, create, write, direct this film that you want to make. Like you don't walk out of school with that skill set. And so just to go back, because I want to figure out how you got to that point. when you went to school, you went to college, what did you go, what was your education in specifically?
Yeah. So, okay, I'm glad you asked this because I had some really great influences here. So when I graduated high school, I got a scholarship to a school called Thomas University in Thomasville, Georgia. I went to school, high school in Cairo, Georgia, home of the syrup makers. That's our mascot. Um, and yeah, and so I got the scholarship to Thomas University, but it was for business school. And I had to go in and do an interview and like a presentation, a pitch, and everything. And my pitch was, I want to learn the business side of movies so I can make the movies that I want to make profitable, essentially.
Gotcha.
And I was at that school for a year and a half or so, and ended up transferring to Valdosta State University.
Okay.
Now, in the meantime, I had written, I think I was writing my third screenplay at that time. As I mentioned, I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17. I'm 39 now. And so I was still kind of in this, I mean, this was in the early 2000s, right? So laptops and things weren't where they are now. In fact, that first screenplay I wrote, I hand wrote most of the first draft of it.
Yes.
And then when I got my income tax money, I went to Walmart and I bought one of those word processors where you could only see like one line of type when you type on it.
Yes.
And so that's how I wrote my first 170 pages, which is way, way too long.
Right.
First screenplay was written on that word processor. And then I ended up getting a computer and whatever. So anyhow, I transferred to Valdosta State in business school. I was in a business management class, and I used to write handwrite everything on a yellow notepad, and I would transcribe it later. I'm in this business management class. I'm handwriting this screenplay. The professor calls on me to answer a question, and I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And
my mind's somewhere else right now.
Right. And so I was like, super embarrassed, and I blush really bad when I get embarrassed. And so I just remember my face just being red hot.
Mm-hmm.
I walked out of the classroom. I walked to the bus. I took the bus back to the main campus, and I walked straight from the bus stop to the mass media building because I knew I was following a path that wasn't for me. And I went into the mass media room, and there was one light on in that building, and a man by the name of Mike Savoy was in his office. And I walked in and I talked to him and told him I wanted to transfer in, I want to make movies and this and that. And he told me in no uncertain terms that I was making a mistake, that I'd make more money in business school. And then he paused for a second. He said, "But I can't blame you. I kind of have the same path." And so they got me into the program. And then the program was much more geared toward broadcast journalism. And there weren't a lot of narrative opportunities there. But fortunately, I worked a guy by the name of Frank Barnes, who is still a great mentor to this day, worked on putting together a screenwriting curriculum. I wrote a screenplay called Trojan Horse during that year, which is we'll get on that. You and I can talk about that offline sometime.
Yeah.
Goofy movie. And anyhow, and then I studied abroad the summer before my senior year, and I had been bugging Mike, who was my advisor, to let me produce a movie with the school's gear. The problem was that I think because of the insurance things, you couldn't necessarily let a student take gear out. Like you could let them do something for a class, but you couldn't necessarily take it out and for a weekend and that sort of thing. And so I bugged about it, and it was no, 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 no. Well, when we went to London, London is where we studied abroad. Mike was the on-site administrator for the program for my portion of the program. And we got there, and it was supposed to be a travel documentary class. And the first day that we were there, our gear, all of our gear was stolen. And so, yeah, so we couldn't make our documentaries. So it ended up becoming basically like an American or a world film class. And I'd already taken a film class and back in Valdosta. So it was just kind of like a bit of a letdown, but it was what it was, you know. And so I'll never forget, on the flight back from London, I was sitting like one row back on an aisle, and he was sitting, you know, a row up from me on an aisle. And I was storyboarding this short film I'd written. And he turned around and looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm storyboarding my movie." And he said, "I told you that we can't really, you know, let you make it." And I said, "Well, I'll figure out a way to make it." And, you know, he kind of turned forward, kind of, you know, exhaled and turned back and said, "All right, we'll figure it out." And so what ended up happening was they let me do kind of pre-production and production in the fall semester, post-production, screening in the spring semester before graduation. And you know, it was kind of one of those things where I was, you know, paying people in pizza, you know, to come in and do these little, you know, scenes. We were shooting at this house that me and my roommate had. I remember one night I was out by myself. There was a storm coming in, wind whipping and things, and I'm hand holding, kind of doing this stuff, and all by myself, and with lights set up and sandbags outside of this house, and then you know, got that all like shot, and then started to work on the edit. And as we were planning to screen the film at something like middle of March or something like that, and like at the end of April or end of May or end of February, there was they upgraded our machines at the school, and I lost everything, the entire edit, like 3 weeks out from the screening, right? And I remember just kind of wandering around the I gave myself one day to feel sorry for myself and to sulk about it. I wandered around campus and just felt so bad for myself. And then, you know, I went home and I said, "All right, it's got to be done. This is my grade, and this, you know, I've got my goal right there." I knew already, I'd already edited like 80% of the movie, so I knew what I needed to do. And it actually was a really good lesson in, you know, dealing with unfortunate circumstances, because the movie that I ended up cutting, even though it's not high art or not great, it is better than the movie that I had set out, that I had cut to that point. Yep. It ended up much better because I was able to reinterpret the lens in which the audience would view the movie from the outset. And had I not had that happen, I wouldn't have been able to position it in this new. I wouldn't have done it, because I just would have been like, "Oh, I've got it done. I'm done. Like, great, cool." You know, we're 2 weeks ahead of the screening. But having that, you know, that bump allowed me the perspective to go back and reevaluate the project as a whole, re-edit it, and then we screened it for, you know, a bunch of people. And, you know, it's one of those things where I have a lot of anxiety watching my own work with other people.
Sure.
And I remember just feeling so uncomfortable in the theater that day, but, you know, people were very nice about it. And I learned so much about, you know, the holistic view of creating a project. And I think that is what I think minus having that experience, I would not be able to view all of the parts in the way, like, I wouldn't be able to sit here today and say I'd like to direct, this movie later this year if I can get the financing. I wouldn't be able to say that, because I would only have a very, very small view of the whole process. But the opportunity that Mike and Frank and those guys gave me at Valdosta State did really, really open up, kind of the mind to say, okay, I can get my hands around all of this. I don't have to just worry about a little piece. I can understand all of it. So it was really, really, that was a really big time thing for me.
It's so interesting when you look back after you've been in an industry, you've been working at something for so long, and you look back at the beginning, and especially after you start to achieve success and people are starting to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing, and you're not being placated anymore,
Right.
But you look back at those early days, at those moments, and you're like, I left the class. I had that really awkward interaction with my business instructor, teacher at that moment, and I left, and I went straight to where I wanted to be. And at that time, there was that one light on with that one guy there.
Yeah.
Like, what are the chances that was going to happen at that time?
Yeah, right.
And not to say that it's like predestined or fate, but it's some people would look at it and be like, oh, you're so lucky that you found this guy, and you're so lucky that you had this opportunity and that you were there and he was there and that he gave you this chance and was willing to work with you extra. Yeah. But all of those things came from decisions that you made. Like, you created the opportunity for luck to happen.
Right. Absolutely.
You weren't like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to double down. I don't want to be embarrassed again here, so I'm going to double down on business and this thing that I don't want to do because I'm already in it. Right. It goes back to, like, I'm really diving into logical fallacies right now and going into like, well, it's almost like an appeal to tradition where you're like, well, I've been doing it. Yeah. I said I was going to do it, so I got to see it. They're like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Like, that was a beautiful chance for you to reflect and then to take action.
Sure.
And so that's beautiful. But your film being lost is, oh my God. Oh my God.
Man, I felt so sick that day. I just remember walking. I remember thinking that I felt like I was in a movie when it happened, because I remember just walking outside and like looking and I remember the grass in my mind, at least the grass was so green, and I just like, it just everything just felt like I felt like I was walking through soup, or something.
Yeah.
Because it felt like, oh my gosh, I've worked so hard. Because at the time I was working at Walmart, okay, and I would go into work at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd work until like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then all my classes were from like 2:30 until like 9:30 at night. And when I was editing was like 9:30 until like 11 or midnight, and then I would drive 30 minutes home. I'd grab 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I'd get up, take a shower, and I'd go do it again. And I did that every day for that semester, and then on the weekends I was just useless. I just crashed because I was so tired. But it's just one of those things where you have to make a decision. And I talked about this to some other people that, want to be screenwriters and things like that. That's my opinion is, you have to have a certain amount of discipline and drive, and you can't make excuses, if you're serious about like this. There's this amorphous thing that you're trying to achieve that you're only holding yourself accountable to, right?
Yep.
So the only person that you have to blame that's not done is yourself. And so you have to respect yourself and your dream enough to chase it and put the work in, or you can't make excuses.
Yep.
because it's your thing, and you're the only one that can control whether or not you achieve it.
Absolutely.
Um, and so it was, that was kind of one of those things for me. It was just like, yeah, this sucks. This is not good. And I there was at some point I was somewhere between the mass media building and like Langdale Hall or something over there, and I was like, all right, you get a day to feel sorry for yourself.
I love that. When you said
Yeah.
that, I was like, when I've heard, you're not the first person I've heard that gave themselves a cutoff time, and it's not even the. I think the time to mourn is not important, right?
Yeah.
Like it's good, like you're gonna do it. It's almost like what I think is important is that you're acknowledging the fact that you are human,
Absolutely.
and that you're gonna have an emotional response to this because you've
Absolutely.
put this much time and effort into it. But because you've put that much time and effort into it, you don't want to. That's the defining point in between people, between those who choose success and those who choose an excuse. Just like
Yeah.
you said, because and the thing is, a lot of times excuses are they're fully justifiable. Like if you would have
Right.
walked away at that point and been like, I had it, it was done. I was at 80% and it's done. What do you want me to do? Like
Right.
this was scrapped. And very few people would be like, yeah, you probably should just do it all over again. They're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sucks, man. Like I can't imagine. But the mentality that it takes to give yourself a cutoff date, like I'm going to turn around and take action again after this.
Sure.
I'm
Right.
gonna I'm gonna take my day. What's the way that you describe that day is so interesting. Like it's almost like a heightened acuity, like your senses are like they're firing. And I don't know what would cause that, but I know that I've had that same exact feeling under that type of stress, but I've
Sure.
also had it in like states of supreme euphoria. Like where like
Absolutely. Yeah.
things have gone like the second interview I did for this show, I remember walking out and like I was in some world that I had
Yeah.
never been in before, and I
Yeah.
was like, this is really cool that I'm here. I don't know, like all the stuff is the same, but
Sure.
my perception of it is different. And just like it kind of brings a whole new meaning to like being on cloud nine. It's just like the perception is different. Everything's more visceral and it's right there. It's so interesting that the highs and the lows kind of put you in a similar place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's being an artist, and and I think the term artist gets kind of a negative connotation as someone who is, um, a little too much one way or the other sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of it is just that, that ability to perceive and feel, and then communicate it in a way that allows the audience to feel some portion of that. So saying what the level of euphoria, having that same feeling, I'll never forget when I was on that trip in London. um, I had taken a weekend trip to Paris with some friends, and we were going on their metro system, their rail system. And I will never forget walking. I was walking down this whatever the platform, whatever, and I came up these stairs into this tunnel, and there was this. It was like a gush of wind, and at the same time I felt this gush of wind, I heard like the most beautiful violin music I'd ever heard. And it was like a good 150 or 200 feet down this tunnel with nobody else in it, by the way, that I walked. And then I turned and I saw this, street performer playing this violin. But it was one of those things that same sort of thing. Like there's this, this moment that touches all of your. I remember what it smelled like. I remember what it felt
Mm-hmm.
like. I remember what it sounded like. I remember what it looked like. And I think as someone who is a storyteller, or trying to communicate things that are both beautiful and ugly, because
Yes.
a lot of storytelling involves the uglier parts of humanity or whatever. You have to tap into those things that allow the audience to feel it, to achieve whatever message it is that you're trying to convey there at the end of your
It's
piece.
extraordinarily powerful. I think I love that right off the bat. The way that you categorize yourself was as a storyteller,
Mhm.
because the power of storytelling is, it's like the single most powerful thing that we have to communicate ideas as people. That's
Absolutely.
that storytelling is the reason that I became passionate in history. I
Yeah.
remember growing up, I hated history with a
Really.
passion because it was all wrapped around names and dates and locations and all this specificity that was like, it was so much. It was just like, information by the fire hose, and just
Right.
you're being inundated. And
It's
then
like a
when I,
binary thing,
yeah,
and it
exactly.
can't be binary.
No,
Right.
no. And once I was given a storyline with emotion and I was able to attach on emotionally to not necessarily an individual but to a people that were
Right.
going through a situation, like, oh my gosh, I can relate, like I know what I've been in similar situations, I understand that type of struggle. And i could I can only imagine what it would have been for you, like coming across the ocean, taking a month or 2 months to cross the ocean to a place that you've never been to before,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
when it's told in story form, then that's when you get passionate about it. And I wish that was more. I wish that was used more in different aspects of life because it is such a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
So you wrote, like, I'm gonna eventually stop going back to your history, I swear. But
No,
like,
no, you're right.
you wrote your first you did your first screenwriting at 17. Like,
17 years old. Yeah.
so what how does, so obviously you weren't like 17 and you had the idea like, I'm just going to do this. What led up to this passion to write that out?
So I'd always, so okay, so my grandparents, my grandfather on my dad's side and my grandmother on my mom's side were wonderful storytellers. And it was kind of like a front porch or a swing out in the yard sort of
Mm-hmm.
storytelling style.
Love
And
it.
I just loved it. My granddad, when we would visit him, he would always, there was a store up the street from their house, and he would go up and he'd buy some cigars like every morning. And he'd always ask me, "You want to go with me?" And we'd go, and he'd tell me things, and or he would sit out in the swing and he'd tell me stories, or my grandmother would tell me all these unbelievable stories. So I had a real passion for the connection that stories create between people. It
That's
wasn't the
awesome.
craft, it was a connection because I loved them. I loved those moments so much with them.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted, I think I always wanted a way to to be be them, and like to be the person that was telling the story,
Yeah.
right? And so I as a kid, I would write things and write things, and I never would really finish them because I I don't think I'd found my voice or whatever, the conduit that I could really understand storytelling. And so now we get to the embarrassing part of my genesis as a writer. So when I was in high school, it was December of '97. Oh gosh, I might have been. No, yeah, December '97. I just turned 17. I turned 17 in November that year. Titanic was in theaters, and my high school girlfriend wanted to go see it. And whatever you think about Titanic, it's a fine film, whatever. But I will never forget sitting in this kind of little theater in Thomasville, Georgia, which I think is still there, and being enthralled by the power that movie had on people. That it, like, I saw people of different ages, races, classes, all reacting and feeling the same things at the same moments during that movie. And that was the first time I'd ever noticed that before. And I remember my girlfriend wanted to go see it again. And so we went down to Tallahassee and we watched in this independent theater. And I watched the people and same sort of thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, if you want to create some sort of lasting legacy or impression or change things, you can do it through this. And it lined up with this whole storytelling, connection that I kind of was chasing with, my experiences with my family. And so, so I remember I set out to start. I was like, I'm going to just start a screenplay. And I had this idea, and it was set during the Civil War, and it was about a Southern soldier who goes in as a spy in the North, and then he falls asleep in this barn. He's injured. He falls asleep in this barn. This daughter of this house comes and helps him, and they fall in love and that sort of thing, right? So it was this whole like long melodramatic, story. But I started to write it and eventually finished a draft. And then I said, okay, like that feels good that I can finish it. And so I started to try to look at other story ideas. And so it just kind of grew out from that experience that, gosh, this can change the way people treat each other. It can change the way people interact. It can change the way it can change humanity if it's done on a large enough scale. And I think that's what, like you said earlier, like storytelling is the great equalizer. It's the thing that we have had since the beginning, and we'll have it until the end in whatever form it evolves into. I hope that we don't toss too much of it away. And because a lot of what we do is so impersonal, that I certainly hope that we find the time to continue to kind of build that art form and its impact on everybody, on each other.
Yeah, I think that honestly, I'm so curious how the next 20, 30 years are going to pan out with how much technology has become a part of our lives. Yeah. And once we hit the point when, we found how to microprocess things, everything has just been exponentially growing, like faster. The rate of growth is even greater than it's ever been.
Sure.
And so, just like you said, like the separation is starting to occur. We're not starting. It has been around. Social media, the thing that's supposed to help us connect, is actually driving us further apart. But there are so many interesting things that are happening now that are not what anybody would have suspected. Like the amount of attention that we're willing to give a storyline. The thought was, you can't make a movie that's longer than 3 hours because no one will watch it.
Right.
Now they release entire seasons at a time, and that's the expectation.
Sure.
And your ability to follow 6, 7, 8 different storylines within one show for 20 episodes, people will do it.
Yeah.
And then people show up for live events where they're having philosophical debates by the thousands. People are coming together for these types of things, and it's phenomenal. And so it gives me hope that while some parts of us are separating, that storytelling can actually bring it together. Have you ever heard of Steven Pinker?
No.
So he wrote a book recently called Enlightenment Now.
Okay.
I haven't read that one. That was listening to him talk about it. Basically, he dives into, if I understand that book correctly, he dives into why the Enlightenment is so important, and how we're better than we ever have been in the history of mankind. I
Okay.
believe that it goes in that route. But he wrote one before in 2011 called "The Better Angels of Our Nature,"
Okay.
and it's the decline of violence up until now, because
Oh, okay.
a lot of times people will say like, oh yeah, we have all this technology, but we live in such violent times. Like
Mm-hmm.
we live in, like, genocides have happened recently in the 20th century, and
Right.
and
Right. Right.
nuclear weapons and all of this. And he goes in and he dives into in such extensive detail about this that it's mind numbing to some point. It's like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that somebody sat down and did this level of
Right.
nug work to this
Yeah.
research. It's phenomenal. All of this I bring up because one of the most significant things that he could attribute to and this, God, I hope that I interpreted this correct as I was taking in the information. This is the way that it clicked in my head, is that he talked about movies and books and shows, and how they were able to basically they're able to create empathy through fictional stories.
Sure.
And they flesh this out through multiple different social, psychological, double blind test experiments,
Yeah.
where they did it, because they were testing it versus like real stories with real people.
Okay.
So they would bring like a woman who had an abortion, and then they walked through like this extensive detailed story about her, and then they did another one about somebody who was fictional, and the test group knew that this girl was real, and they knew that this one was fictional, and they had
Wow.
them attached to like brain scanners while they
Wow.
were responding. And the level of empathy, the difference between them was, well, the level of empathy for people in that situation was significantly different, were significantly the same, but increased than what it was before.
Wow.
So if
That's
people weren't,
interesting.
it's super interesting, but
Yeah.
it gives like the scientific backing and proof to exactly what you felt
Yeah.
at Titanic, and exactly what you hope that movies will bring. And it's to the point where like it can be attributed to significant decrease in violence and increased empathy between people, because that's
Wow.
it's kind of like the opposite, right? Like if I'm able to empathize with you, it's very unlikely that I'm going to
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
fight, So I mean, they go into detail about, basically the idea of where goods cross borders, armies do not, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that plays a role into it as well. But that was when it came to the social side, that was significant. And it goes to the power of storytelling, and it goes to the
Sure.
power that there's almost like a responsibility embedded to our artists. But and in that responsibility, I'm so happy that I get this opportunity to talk to you as you're achieving these levels of success. But one thing that you said earlier that really I loved, it like made my heart swell, was
Yeah.
you said that it requires discipline.
Yeah.
Right. And that I think, because you talked about the misconception that people have when they hear the word artist, there can be a common misinterpretation of what your life is.
Right. Absolutely, man. It's again, you joke about, I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17. I was 38 before I ever saw it on a big screen. So it's, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, man, you're so lucky. I can't believe, wow. Like
Overnight
it's
success,
just
right?
exactly. It's like the 21-year-old overnight success. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't, you don't, and we don't, I don't, I am now, because I think it'll help people, talking about the grind, because it's not for someone who is wants to do it on a whim. I mean, it's difficult to get your work produced, and it's years and years of work. It's thousands and thousands of um, you know chance meetings, and it's hundreds of like real relationships, and there's a lot of like free time that you miss from family and friends, and You know, I do all my writing when my little boy's asleep, you know, which
Mm-hmm.
means I don't sleep nearly as much as I probably should, you know.
Exactly.
And but there's you know there's a discipline to it, and I think that people thinking that, you know, artists are just kind of doing whatever comes to them,
And just living
they're
aloof, and you're just floating with the
yeah,
wind. Yeah.
there's a
Not the
significant
successful ones.
right, yeah, there's a significant discounting to all of the hard work that they've done, all the
Mm-hmm.
times they've, you know, lost a project that they were 80% done with, or you know, something happens to a painting that they have, or there's a fire, or there's a, you know,
Yep.
whatever. There are all these different things that can happen to somebody. And you know, I have never, I've never met an artist that didn't, um, didn't like take those scars on
Mm-hmm.
and continue to fight. Because if they were an artist and I met them and they had something to show for it, they had those scars.
Yep.
You know, you know, a lot of people, if they had something bad happen to them, they quit, then they're not an artist, and they're not giving that experience to me. It doesn't mean
Yep.
their experience is any less valid, but it's just not, they're just not the artist. But artists do come with these scars, and they come with
Mm-hmm.
these, you know, hours of, you know, thankless, you know, work, and really, you know, most of them, you know, myself included, have a 9 to 5 job,
Yeah.
and a family, and they're pursuing these things outside of the orbit of normal life.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's not an easy task or an easy life, but it is a very, very fulfilling,
Exactly.
fulfilling task,
And
or
so that's
fulfilling life.
there's a misconception, and I've gotten in a few back and forth tiffs with people online about the name of my show, and
Yeah,
to the point where like by the interactions, if you were watching it from a third party, you'd think that I'm fully invested, and I would never have never questioned the name of my show.
yeah,
Absolutely not the case. I question everything all of the time.
yeah,
Just because I'm doing this and I'm publishing regularly, and I'm have the opportunity to talk with amazing people, does not mean I have anything figured out. I
yeah,
don't. I continue. I'm taking the lumps as I go, and I'm figuring. You know what I mean? But the complaint is always that people say that, like, oh, you're telling people to drop everything in their life and to go pursue their passions. And I'm like, no.
right,
I get how that can be. I get it. I get how you would interpret it that way. Two, you've never listened. Like,
right.
so because if you did listen, you would know that I'm telling you to unmoor yourself from the things that are stopping you from living a fulfilled life.
Right.
If your 9 to 5 facilitates your ability to pursue your passion project and to go out and do it, keep it. You have a responsibility to keep that job so that you can pursue your, like, that's
Right.
you have, especially if you have a family, if you have children, you owe the pursuit of your dreams to them. You owe it to them to do it, because just like you had mentioned modeled behavior before, and that's one of the most powerful ways to, and this is where it was you didn't specifically say it, it triggered it in my mind when you were talking about your grandparents and the stories that they were telling. That modeled behavior helped shape your entire life.
Right.
And so you're doing that for your son now,
Right.
like through your persistent action in a 9 to 5 job,
Yeah.
but then not allowing that to define who you are.
Right.
You know, and I don't think that defining yourself through your work is necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
If you're passionate about it, but if you're not, then I mean, I want my kids to see that you don't have to. One, you could choose and you could try to monetize your passion.
Yeah.
If you're not able to do it, you can still, like, you don't have to, your life doesn't have to revolve around the thing that brings money into your life.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's a beautiful thing. That
Well,
that you manage that and you're portraying that to your family, to yourself, and to the world. I think it's a beautiful thing.
well, I mean, every person has to find their own path and their own passion and interpret everything for themselves. I mean, I think the thing that's like really cool about like what you do and getting to hear all these different perspectives, the cool thing about what I do and getting to tell stories from different perspectives, it's just rounding out, the human experience, because, everybody has to take whatever resonates with them.
Yes.
And that could come from a movie. It could come from a podcast. It could come from a newspaper article or a magazine article, or it could come from
violin down the tunnel.
Exactly, absolutely. It could come from anywhere, and those things, those experiences and those, people being able to listen and have empathy for each other, is what is going to, there's a lot of vitriol out there right now. There's a lot of anger between people, and I think that it would be really, really great if we would stop looking at all the things that, and this is so trite and cliche, but if we stop looking at things that separate us and start looking at things that make us more alike, and trying to kind of come together, and storytelling, whether it's through a podcast or reading a book or watching a movie or a TV show or whatever, those things unite us in really, really unique ways.
That's where it stops being cliche. That's where you just took it from just the expression of, we need to not focus on the things that make us different and focus on the things that are similar between us. That it's cliches matter, and they exist for a reason.
Sure.
And it's because there's power there and there's energy there.
Right.
And just like anything else, just like the song you hear on the radio for the 117th time, you're like, okay, I got it. Like, it's still good. It doesn't have the impact it once had.
Yeah.
So, and that's the way that I look at my show, and what I'm trying to do with the add-ons on top of the interviews is, if I'm trying, it's so funny. I have a strong distaste for self-help, and which is ironic because it's like exactly what I'm doing. And so, when I look at it, I'm like, okay, well, why do I not like it? What's the distaste there? And it goes to the same reason why I would dislike that cliche, is that it brings up a good point and then it leaves it floating out there. To be like, you figure it out. So, okay, find the things that make us, well, how? If I wore an I'm with her shirt, and I'm watching, and I'm jumping up for joy today as the impeachment articles walked across from the House to the Senate. And my brother is a diehard Trump fan. Where do we find common ground? And where you took it with content and media and movies and podcasts and music, like, there are so many viscerally emotional things that can tie us together. Like, Titanic is a great example in my lifetime, that was the first movie that did exactly what you said, and it showed in box office tickets.
Right, absolutely.
That it crushed continuously, and still up there. I don't know where it's at, but it's still
pretty high.
Exactly, and that's incredible. And it just shows the impact of that story, because it's not real. It's not a real story. But that goes, just a personal thing for me. I love I don't know if it's a real term. I heard somebody say it once, a faction, like a real story, a real event that occurred, but with a fake storyline.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Like, oh, I love it.
Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah. And so, like, that stuff with history, if that's the stuff that really gets me going. It's because I'm like, I can tie it to something real. And then especially with the more real stuff, real events you put into it, like, oh, that's really interesting. And then you watch this person living in the world of that. It's almost like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump was like a perfect example of that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it gives you some sort of context in your own, in your grounded area, but then an insight into what could be, I totally get that 100%.
So one of the things that I put a lot of focus on in my self-help side, God, it pains me just to say the words. But in that echelon of in my operation, my big category is personal narrative. And so
Mhm.
I think that we frequently limit ourselves. People that, let's phrase it this way, people that are not living in with the amount of abundance and to the excess that they could have in their life, that a lot of that happens with the way that they encapsulate or label themselves in their head to something as
Mhm.
simple as like, I'm not good at math. That's not something you go around telling people. If it
Right.
comes up, okay, yeah, I'm not great at math. But that statement has power that started probably decades prior,
Sure.
and you've owned it. Like, that's
Right.
me. I am a person who is not good at math. And
Mhm.
so you extrapolate that across all aspects of your life. Where are you limiting yourself in a way that is not real?
Right.
You've accepted barriers to your potential because something happened and you allowed a pebble to be a boulder.
Mhm.
My story about this is my side sprayer in the sink. Like, I moved into this place, and
Mhm.
I had I didn't even know they were called side sprayer. It's a hose that you use to spray
Yeah. Yeah.
dishes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I had to look it up. I'm like, what is this thing called? Oh, that makes sense. Logical. It's a side sprayer. So but I went to use it, and I got about 3 to 4 inches of slack. And I was like, oh, that's stupid. Like, I can't use this. So in my head, I was like, okay, well, it looks like I'm not using that. And I just wash my dishes by hand, put it in to the dishwasher, whatever. It's all good. And I just
Yeah.
forgot that I had it. 8 months later, I go to grab it again, just not even thinking about it. I grab it, and I have 2.5 feet of slack. And I'm
Yeah.
like, didn't wasn't I not using this for a reason?
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Right.
and so
Right.
I looked underneath, and the hose is routed around the knob that turns the water on,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Sure.
That's it. I let a knob be
Yeah.
the boulder in my river, diverging the path of the water going down when it was a pebble.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Right.
it's the power of our mind to just accept things. I mean, it's
Sure.
really cool when you think about it, because it's like, I'm gonna find a way to yes, even with this being in the way. How much easier could your life be if you actually analyze those things, and you
Right.
then you're like, oh, maybe I would be good at math if I just had somebody that showed me how to do it the right way.
Right.
All of this is just a build up for me to ask you about your personal narrative. We had talked about it prior to, but I'm so curious about, at what point did you feel like you could take on, and do you now? I'm assuming you have to with where you're at, but do you call yourself a screenwriter? Like, in your head, you're like, I'm a screenwriter.
Yes.
And when did that happen? How did that come on? Was there a struggle in getting to that point? Like, did you take that on super early at like 17? Were you like, I'm a screenwriter? Like, just dive into that.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think perception's fluid. So I think early on, right out the bat, I thought I was going to I'm a screenwriter. And then experience told me otherwise. And that, you write a screenplay, you think that you're going to win an award or get something made, because you're naive. You don't understand the, the context or the world that you're walking into. And I think that's okay. I think that enthusiasm pushed me through the first sort of growth of my career when I realized I wasn't a screenwriter and that I had to be a student and that I had to get a job and I had to do all these things. But that if I wanted to be a screenwriter, then I had to be disciplined enough to put in the work
Mm-hmm.
um, and still take care of, at the time it was just myself. Um, but I do consider myself a screenwriter now. Not only a screenwriter, but
Mm-hmm.
thankfully a husband and a father,
Yes.
a creative professional. I work for a television station, so I get to do creative things all the time. A lot of people that go through my line of study don't end up in my line of work.
Mm-hmm.
They go on and do other things. And the creative arts are a good opportunity to do that because one of the sort of uh, like the things that you learn the most is how to adapt and how to solve problems in the face of you know, like not, you know, insurmountable, but
Yeah, just
certainly some
adversity,
real
sure, yeah.
challenges. Yeah, some real challenges, and you have to be flexible and adaptable and figure things out on you know, on a dime. Um, but I think that I I think the first time I really felt, you know, this go around, like I was a real screenwriter. I wrote a screenplay. It was when we go back to like, you know, the storytelling of my grandparents and the connection that it had to me. Where it all kind of came full circle for me. I wrote a screenplay. It's called Unicorn, titled Unicorn, and ever since that screenplay, and I probably did it before, but it was in a very, very explicit way in that screenplay. I started to write things in the text that meant that was my message to somebody that I cared for. And so in Unicorn, so when I was a kid, when I was a little kid, you know, like 2, 3 years old, I had really long eyelashes, and when, you know, like you get sleep in your eyes, and my mom would come in the mornings and she would try to wake me up, and I would try to open my eyes, and sometimes I wouldn't be able to open them up because the sleep was in the eyes, but I could see, I guess, just enough to see the fluttering of my eyelashes in the light against the light. And I would tell her that I had spiders on my eyes. And so she told me this, of course, years later, and it was something that meant it was sweet to her, that something she felt, you know, thought fondly of. I wrote this movie Unicorn, and that movie's set in Revolutionary War era in North Carolina. It's about these um, this set of twins, a boy and a girl, who the girl becomes ill. The boy, who we open the movie with the grandfather telling these fairy tales, and the unicorn on Pale Mountain, who just a touch of this alicorn would cure any mortal ailment. So the sister gets deathly ill. The brother is going to go find a unicorn and bring it back. While the brother is on this journey, he ends up in this forest with this, you know, kind of group of motley crew of people that he's accumulated along the way. And he's asleep, you know, under this canopy of trees, and a spider comes down and starts to, you know, sew his eyes shut. It's very dark, you know, very kind of dark way, but it was, I remember writing that scene and like, this is for mom, like these are the spiders on my eyes. And so that was the moment I knew that I was taking a skill and making it mine.
Yeah.
You know, it was me. This wasn't just me sitting. Anybody can sit down at a keyboard and put words on a page. But when you can put something that is so personal to you in a story, and it gives you that, you know, it really, really, you know, fills your soul like that, then it takes on another level in your life. And so that's kind of the point where I was like, all right, I'm a screenwriter now. I can do this. And you know, I've done that, you know, and sometimes it's just a kind of a, you know, a line of dialogue or whatever. But I do try to, you know, imbue these different, you know, Easter egg, you know, everybody talks about Marvel movies and things, are Easter eggs and all that stuff for all the expanded universe and everything. My Easter eggs are for the people that I love.
Yes.
And so that kind of is where I felt like, all right. And then, you know, the success, you know, of having things produced, it came after that. And it was, that was another, that was just kind of a reinforcement of what I'd already
Yeah,
told myself,
absolutely.
that, okay, yeah, I do belong here. Like Lionsgate just released a movie I wrote. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is like, okay, that's really cool. Now it's like, okay, now we just gotta keep building and keep
It's almost like, okay, that's cool. The world has finally recognized what I already knew.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's not, and it wasn't. The thing that I like about that is like I always appreciate a sense of confidence, um, and but not arrogance, right?
Right.
And so it's not like you had an expectation like, why don't you recognize me? It's like, oh,
Right.
cool, that happened. Like you're there. I've been here, and I'm doing my thing, and it's so awesome that it's now being experienced by other people.
Right.
This goes to a very baseline part of um, something that I'm trying to build out, and it's about the different types of motivation. And like you laid it out perfectly. I'm going to talk to you about potentially being able to like steal your story to be able to like it'll be you,
Yeah.
but it's just it's such a perfect example of how to understand motivation. The two motivation can be broken down in like two significant categories,
Mhm.
and it's to something that you had spoke about earlier about extrinsic and intrinsic.
Yeah.
So if something is if you're extrinsically motivated to do something, like if you were extrinsically motivated to screenwrite and to be in the industry that you're in, it would be more likely that something like the production through Lionsgate would have been the moment where you're like,
Yeah.
I made it because I have been validated by something external to myself. But the intrinsic, the internal
Sure.
validation, that it goes to a different type of motivation and a different level of happiness, that cannot be achieved through an extrinsically motivated thing. It's,
Right.
and it's just like everything else we talked about. And nothing is binary. It's not like I'm intrinsically motivated, so that doesn't work. Like, no,
Right.
absolutely. Like getting paid for the work that I do absolutely helps. Having my name roll on the screen, like absolutely makes a difference. That's not why I do it.
That's right.
There's
Yeah.
internal happiness, internal satisfaction that comes from it.
I talk. There's a guy that I know. His name is Dennis Steinmetz. He was a producer on the Mickey Mouse Club for a lot of years,
Wow.
and I met him. Gosh, I met him probably 16, 17 years ago, right before I came to Savannah, actually. And he was, and this is a guy who has achieved ungodly amounts of success
Mm-hmm.
in the industry in which I want to be.
Right.
And he asked me, he's like, so, um, and even this is even back then, I'd only been writing for, a few years at that point. He asked me about, writing. And I said, it's one of those things that, I wake up in the middle of the night, I have to do it. There's something in me that's driving me, that's making me not give up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's like, well, that's how you know it's real. And I can't tell you how many times over the years I've told people, if I could have quit 10 years ago, I would have quit.
Yep.
Because I missed out on a lot of things that would have been great and fun and cool. But now I've had some other things happen that are great and fun and cool too,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so and things that, not only are really great to see, it's very cool to see your name on a screen. Um, what's better than that to me is when an actor gets it right. When you write
Yeah.
a scene and they interpret the scene and they perform the scene, and it is so close to the way it was in your head that you're like, oh my gosh, like that whole piece right there came here. It was here first, and
Mm-hmm.
that is like there is that is such an intense high. Like it's such a satisfaction to that.
Yeah.
And I certainly hope that this project in the summer moves forward, I think it will. I'm hopeful that, this project that I want to direct, there's another low budget project that I'm looking at hopefully being able to do with some folks here in town. And then a lot of other things that are just kind of on the docket, and that,
Yeah.
get my motor running,
Yeah.
and even most of these people, the actors and, well, most of the, writers and directors in Hollywood, they all had the same, sort of path where they have just had lonely nights, a lot of times, and a lot of work, and but they, believed, or were stubborn enough to just
Yeah.
keep going, and somehow they found that one story that resonated at that one moment that made them who they were, and I think that as a writer and filmmaker, you just have to keep going until you find that. And I think once you kind of resonate on that level, it gets a lot easier to identify projects and grow outward. So it's really extraordinary, the way it all kind of plays out.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I absolutely
Yeah.
love it. And so if you had the chance, and if we're able to give voice and get a direct ear to somebody who's listening that is always considered wanting to get into this industry,
Mhm.
and they're sitting there and they're like, I absolutely want to screenwrite. I want to get in. I want to direct. What advice can you give that young person that's ready to kick off, or somebody that wants to shift gears and to go into that industry, like from your extraordinarily long time doing it and having gotten these scars? Like what advice
Yeah.
could you give to somebody?
Well, I think that's a big part of it is, uh, first of all, you've got to be willing to put in the work. Um, you know, the movie business is glitz and glamour. If you want to be a screenwriter or a director, it's not that. It is really, really a cerebral exercise. It's commitment and discipline, and not going out with your friends when not saying you can't do that, but
Mm-hmm.
understanding that if you're driven to succeed, give yourself deadlines, give yourself realistic goals to hit. Network with people. The only reason that I got to where I got was because I was not afraid to network with people. And sometimes that means, like, oh, I see an article online and it's got a list of, like, people who are, involved in film in Georgia, and it's got their email addresses, and I blind email them.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've done that have borne out into meaningful relationships. So it's work, work and network, and then one of the things that you said in our first meeting really stuck out with me, and I said it on Ed Susevich's radio show, and I didn't credit you, and I hate myself for it.
Not so good.
I said it, and then he was like, "Oh man, that's really good," and then I was like, "Yeah, it's really good," and then I was like, "Oh my God, Matthew told me that." But
honestly, like, so that's probably the closest. This feeling right now is probably the closest that I can get to relating to what you talked about, the way that you felt when an actor portrayed emotionally in his character exactly what, or close to the energy that you were conveying in your screenwriting. Because that's essentially, that's like what I want to do. I want to be able to provide that for people, and like, credit not required.
well, I think I'm crediting you now. But no, you said, value yourself, value your voice. And that is so important. As a consumer of content and then a creator of content, it becomes easy to imitate or to doubt yourself or doubt your experience. But you know what? We need new and different and diverse voices. We need people that look at things from the side, from the side sprayer, from the faucet. You know,
Yep.
you got to have all viewpoints, and you got to have all people, and you got to be brave, and you gotta try. And you know
Yeah.
what? It's not for everybody, and that's
No.
okay.
Yep.
It just, the life is all about exploring who you are and experience and trying to find what gets your motor going every day and makes you feel fulfilled every night. And the only way that you can do that is to try these different things and experience. And if you find yourself drawn to be a writer, work and network and value your voice, because I can promise you, not a lot of people will value your voice in the early going. But if you stick with yourself and believe in what you're doing, and just, even when you're tired, get in and pound out some pages. Most of the things that you write are not going to be very good.
Yeah.
But when you read or write them, they'll be better, and you'll continue to see some growth. I mean, that's really all you can ask for, in terms of being a creator. And so yeah, I mean, if I've got a couple people that have reached out to me through contacts that I had, that I'm trying to kind of help, provide some perspective on. So if you want to include my email and all that stuff in your show notes and whatever, awesome. You can certainly do that. It's jasonusry@gmail.com. That's JASONUSRY@gmail.com. I'm happy to, sometimes it takes me a little bit of time to get back to people, because there's a lot of irons in the fire right now. But I'm happy to talk to people, and also, not necessarily, you don't have to be stuck to a specific medium now. I mean, you've got podcast. I mean, you've got podcast. I'm helping produce a podcast right now as well with some law enforcement guys who.
I did not want to forget that. I didn't want to drop it. Like the amount of things that you're doing right now, it's not trivial, like it's
you just try, right?
Yeah. No. And I love that, how you had talked about like basically like being naive going in. Like, had I known what it was going to take from me from the start, I probably would have been like, nope, I'm good. Good on it. If it's going to extract that much out of me, probably not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so you are not the first person I've heard say that, though, thank God I was young and dumb when I started. And there's no way that if I started later that I would have achieved the success, because I would have been smarter. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to deal with that. And that's going to be a lot. And so, and to me, like, I don't think that it necessarily has to do with age. I think it's easier to be dumb when you're young, right?
Yeah.
But if you have that passion, and again, if you're waking up at 3 a.m. and that's what's calling to you, then you're like, answer the call. Answer the call and set your life up in a way that's conducive to answering the call.
Right.
And you did it. You provide an amazing example of it.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I love what you're doing. Like, I mean, we had a great connection when we first met, and dude, I appreciate you for chatting with me and hanging out, and like the opportunity, like, it's just been phenomenal, man. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm glad that it wasn't one side. So I was like, dude, I told Adam, I was like, I really like Jason, man. Like, I think Jason's a great guy. And so, and it's, you pick it up with some people. And like you said, like, it's about networking, and it's about putting yourself out there. And so I'm super happy that I did. And I'm super happy that you were there.
Absolutely.
And it's just, hopefully that can also be a model for people that's like, don't be afraid to go out there and to talk to people about the things that you're interested about, because you'd be surprised at who's listening.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on.
You too, brother.
If people want to follow you in any way, like do you keep up on like social media with like the stuff that you're producing or involved with?
Yeah, so we have Deadwater has a Facebook page. If people are interested in checking that out, I have a Facebook page. It's locked up privacy wise, but if you're friends of a friend, friend me and I'll friend you. Again, jasonusry@gmail.com. If people have specific discussion points or want to talk about screenwriting or whatever, I'm happy to talk to people about that. End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal is the podcast that I produce. Kevin Grogan's former homicide detective from Savannah, here in Savannah. Lou Velozzi is a former special agent undercover ATF.
And when you go on and you watch the video, you're like, "Yep, that's exactly who they are."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's no question. Like just visually, like, yep, you live up to all of that.
Exactly. They are guys. Look, they are no holds barred.
Mm-hmm.
They have seen it all. They are like excellent advocates for law enforcement and military, and they have somehow, like, I'm working on projects for the screen with them as well.
Yeah.
So I really hope that we get I have no doubt at some point we'll get these things on the silver screen and maybe on the TV screen.
Awesome.
But those guys are as real as it gets, man, and they are no BS. And it's funny, like I'm a little writer guy, and I go into the bar, to have lunch with them or whatever, and it's just like these two guys, and I'm like, hey guys,
how you doing?
It's just so funny.
I love it. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people that are really into that type of content right now. That's some of the biggest, most popular stuff is our crime-based shows, and so I know I was able to find it on YouTube super easy.
Yeah. It's on YouTube. We're on all the major listening apps. We're not on Stitcher, I listen to a lot of things on Stitcher, but we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so several of the other ones, and yeah, I mean we've got some pretty wild guests lined up for the next few weeks.
Awesome.
Which will is sure to stir some good conversation.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun with those guys, and they basically the focus of that podcast is allowing law enforcement professionals or military veterans or people that have worked with veterans or law enforcement officers the opportunity to talk from both their personal and professional front lines. So not just their experiences on the job, but how those experiences affected them, both from the mental health aspect and their personal lives, and how they've dealt with those coping with those things. So it's a really, really good way to do that. And then I've got a couple other podcasts maybe we can talk about later on. Definitely. That I'm developing right now, and one of which I'll want to have you on as a special guest, I think. So maybe both of them actually. Yeah, maybe both of them actually. But yeah. So yeah. No, it's anybody that wants to reach out. They can feel free to reach out to me in those ways, or LinkedIn, Jason Usry on LinkedIn.
And for just on the last, and just for Deadwater, just so people know, like if you're interested, if the End of Watch sounded interesting to you, and the psychological aspects of dealing with the things that soldiers deal with and police deal with, if that type of stuff interests you, Deadwater is right up your alley.
Yeah.
I did not know what it was going to be about when I started. I had to go out and buy a DVD player so that I could watch this movie. I realized I was like, I can't watch a DVD. Apparently I can't do that. So I went out specifically for this movie, and I got it, and I watched it. I'm like, oh my God, it was so worth it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. It deals with post-traumatic stress. I mean, it's a real thing, you know, and it's important to talk about. Yeah, so thanks to you for your service, to all of our men and women who serve our country, and you know, both in the military and as first responders. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, you know, there's a lot of there's not enough gratitude given to the sacrifices you guys make, and that your families make, you know, when you're out there standing up for us. So thank you. And you know, I sincerely appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, no, I feel ingratiated by most people with it, and it's been phenomenal. Like I remember my dad telling me stories about him coming back from Vietnam, and
Yeah.
it makes me feel bad how good we're treated now versus the
Yeah.
way that they were. But that's we could go on on PTSD and the impacts of that, and why it's taboo, and why the people in these professions don't want to talk about it,
Right.
because it's definitely a thing. But
Sure.
a conversation for another day. I just
Absolutely, brother.
thank you so much. I really
You too, man.
appreciate it. This meant a lot. So
Yeah, man. Me too. Thanks so much, brother.
you got it.
All right.